You've seen Pascal's triangle 100 times without knowing it. Every time a flower blooms with 5 petals, roses, wild strawberries, buttercups, you're looking at row 5 of Pascal's triangle. When snowflakes form those perfect 6-sided crystals falling on your windshield, that's row 6. The branching pattern of tree limbs, the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower, the probability of flipping heads 3 times in a row, all of them coded into a mathematical pattern discovered by a 17th century French genius who was simultaneously solving equations and wrestling with the deepest questions of human existence. Blaise Pascal saw something nobody else saw, not just in numbers, but in everything. Here's what's wild. Pascal didn't just discover this triangle as an abstract mathematical toy. He recognized it as a fundamental pattern woven into reality itself, appearing in biology, physics, probability, even the structure of chance and choice. But here's the part that will absolutely fascinate you. The same mind that discovered mathematical order hidden in nature also discovered psychological order hidden in human chaos. Pascal looked at human beings, contradictory, self-deceiving, simultaneously magnificent and miserable, and saw patterns there too. Precise, predictable patterns in how we avoid truth, how we distract ourselves, how we make decisions when certainty is impossible. You know that feeling when you're scrolling endlessly through your phone, not because you're enjoying it, but because stopping means facing something else? Pascal mapped that pattern in 1658. He gave a name, diversion, the predictable human pattern of fleeing from confronting our own inner emptiness. The triangle appears everywhere in nature because nature has hidden architecture. Pascal philosophy appears everywhere in human life because humans have hidden architecture too. And the man who could see one could see the other. If you've ever felt that nagging sense that there's order beneath what looks like chaos, patterns you can almost perceive but can't quite name, you're thinking like Pascal. If you're drawn to both scientific precision and life's big questions, you're not confused. You're recognizing what Pascal knew. These aren't separate domains. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you why Pascal's triangle shows up in flower petals, probability distributions, and fractal geometry. But more than that, I'll show you how the same insight that let Pascal see mathematical patterns in nature also let him see existential patterns in your life. Patterns that explain why you feel the way you do right now. If you want to discover more profound thinkers who saw what others missed, minds like Pascal who bridge science and wisdom, subscribe to this channel where we explore the thinking of history's most brilliant pattern recognizers. Let me show you something that will change how you see your garden. Pascal's triangle looks deceptively simple. You start with 1 at the top. Then each row below is formed by adding the 2 numbers directly above. Like this. 1 at the peak, then 1 1 below it, then 1 2 1, then 1 3 3 1, then 1 4 6 4 1, then 1 5 10 10 5 1. Looks like a quirky number pyramid, right? Just a mathematician's doodle. Except this doodle contains a Fibonacci sequence hidden diagonally, the binomial theorem where every row represents powers of 11 and the exact probabilities of every possible combination in any chance event. But here's where it gets eerie. Nature uses this exact pattern to build itself. Count the petals on flowers around you. 3 petals on lilies and iris. That's position 3 in the Fibonacci sequence, which lives inside Pascal's triangle. 5 petals on roses, buttercups, and wild roses, position 5. 8 petals on delphiniums, 13 on marigolds, 21 on asters. These aren't random. They're Fibonacci numbers, and they emerge from the mathematical relationships encoded in Pascal's triangle. Why? Because when plants grow, they optimize for sunlight exposure and seed packing efficiency. The mathematical ratios in Pascal's triangle represent the most efficient arrangements in space. Nature doesn't know mathematics. Nature is mathematics. The triangle describes the underlying architecture of physical growth. You know what fascinates me most about this? Pascal discovered this pattern in 1653, nearly a century before anyone understood why it appeared in nature. He saw the architecture before anyone knew there was a building. Think about tree branches for a moment. Main trunk splits into two branches. Each of those splits into two more. The pattern of branching 1, 2, 4, 8, 16 follows the powers of 2, which is exactly what you get reading down the sides of Pascal's triangle. The tree doesn't decide to grow this way. This is a geometric consequence of efficient resource distribution. The triangle predicted the pattern. Or consider probability. Flip a coin 4 times. How many ways can you get exactly 2 heads? Pascal's triangle tells you instantly. Look at row 4, position 2. The answer is 6. The triangle doesn't just describe what happened. It describes what must happen given the mathematical structure or chance itself. Here's Pascal in 1654, writing to fellow mathematician Pierre de Fermat. I have discovered propositions which reveal the universal geometry underlying what appears as chaos. He wasn't being poetic. He meant it literally. What looks random, coin flips, petal counts, branch splits, follows precise mathematical law. But notice something crucial about Pascal's approach. He didn't start with abstract theory and force it onto nature. He started by observing reality carefully, then discovered the mathematics that explain what he saw. This is the opposite of how many intellectuals work, imposing systems on reality, rather than discovering systems within reality. Pascal's triangle appears everywhere in nature because it describes fundamental relationships, how things combine, how they branch, how they distribute. It's not that nature obeys a triangle. It's that the triangle is a description of how reality is structured at the most basic level. And here's where Pascal's genius becomes truly fascinating. He applied the exact same methodology, careful observation, revealing hidden patterns to human existence. Blaise Pascal was 19 years old when he invented the first mechanical calculator. By 23, he conducted groundbreaking experiments on atmospheric pressure and vacuums. By 31, he'd laid the foundation for probability theory and discovered the triangle that bears his name. Then, at age 31, on the night of November 23, 1654, something happened. Pascal's carriage nearly plunged off a bridge into the Seine River. He survived by pure chance. The horses fell, but the carriage stopped at the edge. For several minutes, Pascal hung suspended between life and death, fully conscious, unable to move, staring at the abyss. When he was finally pulled to safety, he went home and wrote for 2 hours straight. He sewed the paper into the lining of his coat and carried it with him for the rest of his life. It began, fire, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, now philosophers and scholars. What happened? The man who saw mathematical patterns in everything suddenly saw an existential pattern. The same pattern you and I live inside, but rarely notice. Here's what Pascal realized in that moment of clarity. Human beings spend enormous energy avoiding the most obvious pattern in existence, our own mortality and the questions it raises. We're all heading toward the same edge that his carriage nearly crossed. But unlike his horses, we know it, and we structure our entire lives around not thinking about it. Notice Pascal's methodology here. It's identical to how he approached the triangle. Careful observation of what's actually happening, then discovering the underlying pattern that explains it. He started observing people, aristocrats in Paris salons, gamblers, intellectuals, religious zealots, himself. And he saw a pattern as precise as the one in flower petals. Humans systematically flee from self-confrontation through constant distraction. Pascal gave this pattern a name, divertissement, diversion, and he described it with the same mathematical precision he brought to probability. Nothing is so insufferable to man as to be completely at rest, without passions, without business, without diversion, without study. He then feels his nothingness, his forlornness, his insufficiency, his dependence, his weakness, and he described it with the same mathematical precision he brought to probability. Nothing is so insufferable to man as to be completely at rest, without passions, without business, without diversion, without study. He then feels his nothingness, his forlornness, his insufficiency, his dependence, his weakness, and he described it with the same mathematical precision he brought to probability. Nothing is so insufferable to man as to be completely at rest, without passions, without business, without diversion, without study. He then feels his nothingness, his forlornness, his insufficiency, his dependence, his weakness, and he described it with the same mathematical precision he brought to probability. Nothing is so insufferable to man as to be completely at rest, without passions, without business, without diversion, without study. He then feels his nothingness, his forlornness, his insufficiency, his dependence, his weakness, and he described it with the same mathematical precision he brought to probability. Nothing is so insufferable to man as to be completely at rest, without passions, without business, without diversion, without study. He then feels his nothingness, his forlornness, his insufficiency, his dependence, his weakness, and he described it with the same mathematical precision he brought to probability. Nothing is so insufferable to man as to be completely at rest, without passions, without business, without diversion, without study. He then feels his nothingness, his forlornness, his insufficiency, his dependence, his weakness, and he described it with the same mathematical precision he brought to probability. Nothing is so insufferable to man as to be completely at rest, without passions, without business, without diversion, without study. He then feels his nothingness, his forlornness, his insufficiency, his dependence, his weakness, and he described it with the same mathematical precision he brought to probability. Nothing is so insufferable to man as to be completely at rest, without passions, without business, without diversion, without study. He then feels his nothingness, his forlornness, systems offer the freedom to choose your master. And here's what both sides don't want you to realize. There's a third option. You could actually own things. Your family could be an economic unit that produces value, not just consumes it. Your community could have local ownership, local control, local resilience. But that would mean you're not dependent on them anymore. And they can't have that. Before you object that this is impossible in a modern economy, understand, Chesterton isn't advocating a return to medieval guilds. He's advocating a principle, subsidiarity, distributed ownership, human-scale economics that can be applied in any era. The principle remains, the application adapts. So what is distributism actually? It's beautifully simple. Property should be widely distributed among families and communities, not concentrated in corporations or centralized in the state. The goal is maximum number of property owners, people who own their homes, their farms, their workshops, their small businesses. Economic independence through ownership. The key distinction Chesterton makes is this. Capitalism concentrates ownership upward. Socialism centralizes ownership in the state. Distributism distributes ownership downward and outward. It's not everyone owns everything collectively. That's communism. It's not a few people own everything. That's capitalism. It's most families own something productive. Think of medieval guilds, but don't get stuck on the medieval part. The principle is craftsmen own their tools, merchants own their shops, farmers own their land. They weren't wage workers, and they weren't state dependents. They were property owners with genuine independence. Chesterton combined this with Catholic social teaching, particularly the principle of subsidiarity. Decisions should be made at the most local level possible. Your family's economic life should be controlled by your family, not by distant corporations or bureaucrats. Your town's economy should be controlled locally, not by Wall Street or Washington. Notice what happens to community when this occurs. When ownership is local, decisions are local. When the hardware store is owned by your neighbor, he cares about the community. It's his community. When it's owned by a distant corporation, they extract profits and abandon you when it's not profitable anymore. You've seen this, right? Every small town with a dead main street and a Walmart on the edge. That's not progress. That's economic colonialism. Wealth extracted, community destroyed, local ownership eliminated. If this challenges everything you thought about economics, hit like so more people discover there's an alternative to the binary both parties sell. Here comes a really interesting part. Distributism isn't just economic theory. It's about what kind of life humans can actually flourish in. Chesterton believed humans are made for ownership, for craft, for place. We're not made to be interchangeable workers in massive systems. We're made for a human-scale community where we know people, own things, and have genuine stakes. That's why he insisted the family is the fundamental economic unit, not just an emotional one. A healthy economy is built on families that own productive property, a home, a business, tools, and skills. The family produces value, builds wealth across generations, has genuine independence. Compare that to now. Families are consumer units. You work for someone else, buy from someone else, rent from someone else. You're economically passive, dependent on distant systems you can't control. No wonder families are struggling. The economic foundation has been destroyed. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. Under distributism, your family owns your home. No landlord, no bank owning most of it. You're building equity for yourself, not enriching someone else. You own your tools and skills, whether that's carpentry equipment, a barber's kit, professional expertise. You can make a living independent of any single employer. Your community has local ownership. The grocery is owned by locals, the hardware store, the restaurants. Wealth circulates locally instead of being extracted. Decision-making is local. Your town controls its own development. Your neighborhood decides its character. Your family decides its economic direction. Is this perfect? No. Are there problems to solve? Absolutely. But it's a different kind of problem than I'm trapped between corporate serfdom and state dependency. You're thinking this is impossible in a global economy, right? That ship has sailed, can't go back, nostalgia and all that. Wrong. The principle isn't recreate 1910. It's rebuild ownership at human scale using 2024 tools. You can apply distributist principles today. Choose ownership over rental where possible. Buy your home. Don't perpetually rent. Invest in tools and skills that give you economic independence. Support local businesses that circulate wealth locally. Learn practical crafts. You own knowledge. They can't repossess it. Build local community. Know your neighbors. Invest in place. Choose decentralized systems. Bitcoin over banks. Homeschooling over institutional dependency. These aren't complete solutions. They're starting points. They're ways to reorient your economic life from dependence toward ownership, from extraction toward equity. And here's why this matters more than ever. Both capitalism and socialism are failing. You feel it. The game is rigged. Housing is unaffordable. Wages are stagnant. Community is dead. And both parties offer the same non-solutions. Distributism says, there's another way. You're not stuck. The binary is false. Now let me show you something amazing. Why you've never heard of distributism despite it being a complete, worked-out alternative to capitalism and socialism. Because it threatens everyone who benefits from your dependence. Think about who needs you to be economically dependent. Corporations need desperate workers who can't quit because they have no other options. They need consumers who rent everything and own nothing, paying forever. Government bureaucracies need clients who depend on programs, creating permanent constituencies for expansion. Both need you to lack alternatives. A population of property owning, economically independent families, ungovernable, can't be controlled through economic threats, can't be manipulated through promises of security, has actual power to say no. This connects to what we saw earlier about capitalism concentrating ownership. It's not an accident. The system works exactly as designed, to create dependence. And socialism's answer, centralize it more, just intensifies the same dynamic. Chesterton saw this clearly. The poor have been dispossessed of property, but we must not talk of property. We must not restore property to the dispossessed. That would be robbery. So we must abolish property altogether. That would be reform. You feel the weight of that truth? The establishment, left and right, agrees you shouldn't own productive property. They just disagree on who should own it instead of you. Here's a real example. Zoning laws in most American cities. It's illegal to run a small business from your home. illegal to have a small farm on your property, illegal to build a small cottage for extended family. Why? Because that will be distributed ownership. Families using their property productively. Can't have that. You must separate residential from commercial. Keep families dependent on jobs and landlords. Or occupational licensing. Want to cut hair? Need thousands in licensing. Want to arrange flowers? License. Want to be an interior designer? License. These aren't about safety. They're about preventing distributed ownership of skills and trades. Keep people dependent on corporate employment, not independent craftsmen. D. They're about preventing distributed ownership of skills and trades. Keep people dependent on corporate employment, not independent craftsmen. D. They're about preventing distributed ownership of skills and trades. Keep people dependent on corporate employment, not independent craftsmen. D. They're about preventing distributed ownership of skills and trades. Keep people dependent on corporate employment, not independent craftsmen. D. They're about preventing distributed ownership of skills and trades. Keep people dependent on corporate employment, not independent craftsmen. D. They're about preventing distributed ownership of skills and trades. Keep people dependent on corporate employment, not independent craftsmen. D. They're about preventing distributed ownership of skills and trades. Keep people dependent on corporate employment, not independent craftsmen. D. They're about preventing distributed ownership of skills and trade dependent on corporate employment, not independent craftsmen. D. They're about preventing distributed ownership of skills and trade or banking regulations. Impossible for ordinary person to start a bank. Why? Local banks would make local loans to local businesses, circulating wealth locally. Can't have that. Wealth must flow to Wall Street, then trickle down if it feels like it. Notice the pattern? Every regulation, every economic structure favors large centralized ownership, corporate or governmental, over distributed ownership by families and local communities. Both parties support this. Republicans serve corporations, Democrats serve bureaucracies, but both ensure you own nothing. Neither will advocate for a world where your family owns productive property, because that threatens their donor class and their voter dependency. You know what fascinates me most about this? Chesterton predicted it. He said capitalism would concentrate ownership until you'd own nothing and rent everything. Check. He said socialism would respond by centralizing even more. Check. He said both would create economic serfdom dressed up as freedom. Check. And he said the solution, distributism, widely distributed ownership, would be dismissed as impossible, nostalgic, naive. Check. Meanwhile, you're drowning in rent, student debt, subscription fees, paying forever for things you never own. You're one job lost from catastrophe. You're economically fragile despite working full-time. And both parties tell you this is fine, this is freedom, this is modernity. It's not. It's serfdom. Before you object that Chesterton was just romantic about the past, consider. He wasn't advocating to return to anything. He was advocating to recover a principle that families should own productive property and apply it going forward. The medieval guild system had problems? Sure. So does Amazon warehouse labor. So does Soviet central planning. The question isn't, was the past perfect? It's, what principle enables human flourishing? And Chesterton's answer, distributed ownership at human scale, is as valid in 2024 as it was in 1910. Here's what both sides don't want you to realize. You're not powerless. You can make distributist choices today. You can reorient your economic life from dependence toward ownership, from rental toward equity, from extraction toward local circulation. Will it be easy? No. Will it completely solve everything? No. But it's a different direction. It's toward freedom through ownership, not through choosing your preferred master. And that's what they fear most, that you'll stop playing their game entirely. So, how do you actually apply this? What does distributist economics look like in 2024 America? Let me be clear. You can't transform the entire system tomorrow, but you can make incremental moves toward economic independence, toward ownership, toward distributed local wealth. Think of it as building resilience against a system designed to keep you dependent. Start with housing. If you're renting, you're enriching a landlord while building zero equity. I know houses are expensive. That's by design. That's a financialization of housing, turning homes into investment assets. But explore every option. House hacking, where you rent out rooms to cover your mortgage, moving to lower-cost areas. Multi-generational housing with grandparents, parents, and kids under one roof. Traditional and economical, tiny homes, land contracts, anything that moves toward ownership instead of permanent rental. The principle: you're building equity for your family, not paying someone else's mortgage forever. Own tools and skills. This is huge and overlooked. Learn practical crafts, carpentry, plumbing, electrical, mechanics, gardening, cooking, sewing. These are productive capacities you own. Nobody can repossess your skills. You have economic independence that survives job loss. Buy tools instead of renting them. Build a workshop. Invest in equipment that lets you produce value, not just consume. A good set of woodworking tools, a sewing machine, gardening equipment. These are means of production for your family. Imagine the scene for a moment. You lose your corporate job. If you're a pure wage worker with no tools or skills, you're desperate. You'll take anything. But if you own tools and know a trade, you're independent. You can make a living. You have alternatives. That's real freedom. Support local ownership. Every dollar you spend is a vote for an economic system. Spend at locally owned businesses where wealth circulates in your community, or spend at chains where wealth extracts to distant shareholders. Your choice. Yes, local costs more sometimes. That's because Walmart's low prices are subsidized by paying workers so little they need government assistance, which you pay via taxes, and by destroying local businesses, which you pay via dead communities. Real cost is higher. It's just hidden. The distributist principle. Prefer local ownership. Prefer the hardware store owned by your neighbor over Home Depot. Prefer the restaurant owned by the family who lives here over Applebee's. Build local economic resilience. Invest in place. Know your neighbors. Join local organizations, church, civic groups, clubs. Participate in local government. City council affect your life more than Congress ever will. This is subsidiarity in practice. Decisions at the most local level. Why does this matter economically? Because strong local community creates economic opportunity. People hire people they know. They invest in places they care about. They build things together. Atomized strangers, scrolling phones don't build anything. Choose decentralization. This is where 2024 offers tools Chesterton couldn't imagine. Bitcoin versus centralized banks, which distributes power. Homeschooling versus institutional schooling, which is subsidiarity. Small online businesses versus corporate employment, which is family ownership. You're not going to overthrow capitalism or stop socialism's expansion, but you can build alternative systems, parallel structures, distributed networks. Technology enables this now in ways it never has before. Reorient your values. This might be most important. Stop measuring success by corporate metrics, job title, salary, status. Start measuring by ownership. Do you own your home, your tools, your time, your community connections? Stop envying consumption. Fancy cars, expensive vacations, status symbols you rent. Start valuing production. Skills you own, equity you're building, things you make. Stop thinking like a dependent. Asking, what will my employer or the government give me? Start thinking like an owner, asking, what can I build, what I control? Notice the shift happening here. These aren't complete solutions to systemic problems. They're personal applications of distributist principles. They're ways you can move incrementally toward economic independence within a system designed for dependence. Will this fix everything? No. Can you be perfectly distributist in contemporary America? No, but you can move in that direction. You can make choices that build ownership instead of dependence, that strengthen local community instead of feeding distant extraction, that create resilience instead of fragility. And here's the key. Enough families doing this creates a foundation for larger change. Distributism isn't top-down reform, it's bottom-up building. You don't wait for politicians to decree it. You start living it, and it spreads through example and community formation. That's the practical application Chesterton would advocate. Start where you are, use what you have, build what you can. Now you see the political binary in a completely different way, don't you? You're not confused. You're not politically homeless. You're seeing what Chesterton saw. Capitalism and socialism are arguing over different flavors of your dependence. Neither is advocating for your actual economic freedom, which would be ownership of productive property by your family. The capitalist says work for us, rent from us, buy from us. That's freedom. The socialist says let the state own everything and provide for you. That's freedom. But Chesterton said own your own home, tools, business. That's freedom. And he was right. Everything you felt, the sense that both parties fail you, that the economy is rigged, that you're trapped in a false choice. It's not confusion, it's clarity. You're seeing through the con game both sides run. They need you economically dependent to maintain their power. The corporation needs desperate workers and permanent renters. The bureaucracy needs dependent clients. Neither can tolerate a population of property-owning, economically independent families. That's why distributism, this complete, worked-out alternative, has been buried for a century. It's not that it doesn't work. It's that it works too well at creating the one thing power structures fear most: independence. Think about the journey we've taken. We saw how capitalism concentrates ownership upward until you're locked out. We saw how socialism centralizes even more completely. We discovered distributism's principle: widely distributed ownership at human scale. We uncovered why both sides bury this option, and we explored practical steps you can take today. This wasn't easy material. Chesterton never offers easy answers. He offers true answers. And the truth is, you've been offered a false choice your entire life: corporate serfdom or state dependency, wage slavery or welfare client, Republican exploitation, or Democrat paternalism. But there's a third way: ownership, family economic independence, local community resilience, human scale economics. You don't have to choose between two bad options. You can choose the option they've hidden from you, the one where your family actually owns productive property and has genuine independence. That revelation changes everything. You're not trapped. The game isn't rigged beyond escape. There is an alternative, and it's not compromise. It's a completely different economic vision. And it starts with you making distributive choices today, building ownership where you can, investing in place and community, reorienting toward equity instead of perpetual rental. From now on, when you face an economic decision, you'll remember that Chesterton taught us to ask, does this build ownership or dependence? Does this strengthen my family's economic independence or make us more fragile? Does this circulate wealth locally or extract it to distant powers? Those questions transform everything. That house decision, rent cheap or stretch to buy, now you know you're choosing between enriching a landlord forever and building equity for your family. That career choice, corporate security or starting your business, now you know you're choosing between wage dependency and ownership. That shopping decision, local business or Amazon, now you know you're choosing between community wealth and extraction. You don't need to be perfect. You can't be perfectly distributist in a system designed for dependence, but you can make incremental moves toward ownership away from rental, toward local away from chain, toward community away